Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America and around the globe. My name is Andrew Plant. Our top stories. Donald Trump sparks outrage after allegedly making racist comments about African countries. President Trump says he won't pull out of the deal aimed at curbing Iran's nuclear program for now, but it has to change. And a makeover for Facebook. The social network says it should be more about family than business. And the burden of the monarchy. The Queen provides a rare insight on her crown and her coronation. The African Union has expressed outrage and an apology from Donald Trump after he allegedly made derogatory and vulgar references to African countries at a meeting in the Oval Office. President Trump has denied making the remarks, including the use of an expletive. A senior Democratic senator who sat next to Mr. Trump insists that the president did use the phrase repeatedly. From Washington, Nick Bryant reports.
This is a great, it's an important day. Martin Luther King Jr.
The forces of American history seem to collide at the White House today. Donald Trump signing a proclamation in honor of the civil rights leader Martin Luther King. At the very moment he stands accused of using a slur directed at African nations. Here, though, he's stuck to his script.
Today we celebrate Dr. King for standing up for the self-evident truth Americans hold so dear, that no matter what the color of our skin or the place of our birth, we are all created equal by God.
Mr. President, will you give an apology for the statement yesterday?
After the ceremony came a very unceremonious commotion.
Mr. President, are you a racist?
A sitting president being asked by a reporter if he's racist.
Answer these serious questions about your statement, sir. No, Mr. President. I'm talking to the president, not you, sir. Mr. President, are you a racist?
It was behind closed doors in the Oval Office that Donald Trump allegedly claimed that immigrants from Haiti, El Salvador and African nations came from shithole countries. Donald Trump said he used strong language during the meeting on immigration reform with senators, though not that word. But he's been fiercely contradicted by a senior Democrat who was present.
But I cannot believe that in the history of the White House, in that Oval Office, any president has ever spoken the words that I personally heard our president speak yesterday. To no surprise, the president started tweeting this morning denying that he used those words. It is not true. He said these hate-filled things, and he said them repeatedly.
From the United Nations in Geneva came the stiffest of rebukes.
These are shocking and shameful comments from the President of the United States. I'm sorry, but there's no other word one can use but racist. You cannot dismiss entire countries and continents as shitholes.
And across Africa, there's been a furious response. The Botswana government called Donald Trump's comments reprehensible and racist.
It may be just words, maybe in another part of the world. But on this continent, that word is an insult.
Build the wall was the cry of voters who loved Donald Trump's stance on immigration during the election.
We're gonna build the wall, folks. Don't worry about it.
And was said to be doing a victory lap at the White House last night, believing this row will rev up his base. Donald Trump launched his campaign for the White House with an attack on Mexican immigrants and rose to political prominence by claiming falsely that Barack Obama wasn't an American. This latest racial controversy will doubtless please at least some of his supporters at home. But it undercuts US leadership abroad and shows again how America first can mean America alone. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Washington.
President Trump has warned that he'll reimpose sanctions on Iran in less than 4 months, a move that would undermine the agreement under which Tehran curbed its nuclear program. He now wants the US and its European allies to impose new restrictions on the Iranians. Iran has said the deal is not negotiable. Bill Hayton reports.
Is it goodbye to the Iran nuclear deal? As President Trump departed for another weekend at his Florida estate, he left the fate of the 2.5-year-old agreement hanging in the air. In a statement, he announced this was the last time he would hold off on reimposing major sanctions on Iran. But one former American diplomat says this is just a negotiating tactic.
He wants to do something to improve the environment of the agreement, but he doesn't necessarily want to pull out of it because he will not get support in the international community. So what he said is, I will do it this time. The next time this comes up, which is 4 months from now, I want an agreement with Britain, France, and Germany.
On Thursday, Iran held talks with those three governments and the European Union, who all signed the agreement. Together they praised the deal, saying it was making the world safer. Mr. Trump's latest move is intended to break up this cosy club. In effect, he's saying he'll tear up the agreement unless there are three big changes. He wants restrictions on Iran's ballistic missile programs, a tightening up of the agreed inspection arrangements, and he wants to make the agreement permanent rather than expiring in 2026. But Iran's response has been defiant, calling the Trump move a desperate attempt to undermine the agreement. Mr. Trump has flown off into the sunset, leaving the ball firmly in the European court. They have 120 days to decide whether to agree to his demands or risk the end of a deal that took 3 years to negotiate. Bill Hayton, BBC News.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news. There's been a breakthrough in the talks aimed at forming a new coalition government in Germany between the Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats and their rivals, the Social Democrats. They're now expected to discuss a detailed programme for government, including a pledge to work closely with France to strengthen the Eurozone. Hundreds of recently pardoned former President Alberto Fujimori have staged a rally on the streets of Lima to counter anti-pardon demonstrations that have taken place over recent days. Alberto Fujimori was serving 25 years for human rights abuses and corruption, but was controversially pardoned by the Peruvian president on Christmas Eve. Police in Los Angeles say they're investigating sexual assault allegations against the action movie star Steven Seagal. He hasn't commented on the claim, which dates from 2005. The 65-year-old actor has faced allegations by several actresses in the wake of increased scrutiny on Hollywood since the Harvey Weinstein scandal broke last year. Steven Seagal has denied those earlier claims. Now, Facebook has announced what it says is a major change to its news feed, prioritising posts from family and friends over those from advertisers and media organisations. Change follows criticism that too much fake news and misinformation has been ending up on the social network. Facebook's founder, Mark Zuckerberg, admits that it could mean people spending less time on it, which has hit the company's share price. Our media editor, Amal Rajan, reports.
Mark Zuckerberg's social network has become one of the biggest distributors of news in history. Today, the company went back to its social roots. One of our big focus areas for 2018 is making sure the time we all spend on Facebook is time well spent.
You are the property of Bancroft.
Facebook's founder admits users are being fed a heavy diet of news and adverts
In the morning,
together with the more personal posts from friends and family. In Bristol today, many young Facebook users agreed.
It's quite clogged up with adverts for like shopping and baby things at the moment, stuff that I search on Google. It would be a lot better if it was just based around friends and family without any adverts.
Just feeling like I'm being sold to the whole time, and people are making assumptions about my opinions, my tastes, the things I'm interested in.
I'm changing the goal I give our product teams from focusing on helping you find relevant content to helping you have more meaningful social interactions.
To order from 1-800-Flowers.
This is the biggest change to Facebook for many years. It follows controversy over the promotion of fake news, with fears the platform has been used by foreign powers to subvert democracy. Today's changes aren't driven by those concerns over disinformation, but they're clearly an attempt to restore trust in a global brand, and the impact on our news ecosystem could be huge. Mark Zuckerberg clearly accepts that not all news is of equal value, but his changes could seriously damage some reputable news providers that have come to rely on his platform for both eyeballs and income.
There's been a huge build-up.
Brands like HuffPost need the ad revenue Facebook can drive.
The elephant in the room is really fake news and how they're trying to clean up the timelines. And the fear for publishers like us is that the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, and we lose the really important, real journalism along with the fake news that they're trying to get rid of.
Google is often described as part of a duopoly that is swallowing the advertising and news industries together with Facebook.
We've spent the best part of 2 decades.
Today, in a rare interview, Google's most senior British executive seemed to see this as an opportunity.
There's an upside to traditional media moving to the digital world. You can reach 5 billion people within a couple of years on any device. You can use video if you come from the print industry and vice versa. So, you know, as yourself as a journalist, there's a huge ability to tell the important stories in new ways. And people are turning to the digital world more than ever before to understand the news.
For Facebook's young missionary founder, a short-term hit in revenues is worth it to allay accusations that it is becoming the anti-social network. Amal Rajan, BBC News.
Stay with us on BBC World News. Still to come, another fine mess. The discovery of rare film footage of Stan without Ollie is set to delight Laurel and Hardy fans. This is BBC News, the latest headlines. The African Union has expressed outrage and demanded an apology from Donald Trump after he allegedly made derogatory references to African countries. President Trump has said he won't pull out of the deal at curbing Iran's nuclear program now, but it has to change. Let's stay with our top story now on the comments by Donald Trump on immigration. Peter Bowes is our North America correspondent with more on the reaction.
Yes, universal outrage, shock, dismay and outrage. The African Union, which is the most recent group to explain how it feels about what the president is alleged to have said. This group that represents African nations demanding an apology and a retraction from the president. In fact, the group went as far as to say that should issue an apology to Africans and all people of African descent around the world.
Also today, Peter, the president's undergone, we understand, his first official health checkup, something that will become an annual event, but his first one today. What's the reaction been to that?
Yes, well, little reaction so far because we don't really know a huge amount about what the health check, apart from the doctor coming out and saying that it went exceptionally well and that the president is in excellent health, and the doctor saying that he will reveal more details or take questions from reporters on Tuesday. And this is the normal course of events when presidents have their annual checkup. There's nothing different here that didn't happen with President Obama and previous presidents, and the information will be made public, or at least as much information as President Trump wants to be released. He has the final say over which details, and generally we get details about blood pressure, maybe cholesterol numbers, that kind of thing.
Now, families searching for missing relatives after the Manchester Arena bombing were subjected to intrusive media attention, according to a report. It's part of a review by Lord Kerslake into the response to the bombing in May last year, in which 22 people were killed. Our North of England correspondent Judith Moritz has been speaking to one of the families affected.
What's going on? Within moments of the Manchester Arena explosion, the attack was worldwide news. Phone footage was shared immediately. Camera crews and journalists provided round-the-clock coverage for days afterwards, and there were posts on social media as well. There was huge interest in the stories of those most closely affected. They included the family of Martin Hett, one of those killed in the blast.
I'm a Coronation Street superfan.
Martin had a large online following and had previously been on TV. His relatives quickly found themselves in the spotlight. Press reporters arrived at their house before the family knew that Martin had died.
They had people coming round, knocking on the door and ringing the bell and basically saying, sorry for your loss, but would you like to comment? And he wasn't even officially dead yet. How can anybody be so cruel and go and say, sorry for your loss? You know, so we didn't find out officially until that evening he was dead.
The way the emergency services responded to the Arena attack is already being reviewed by an independent panel. Now it will also examine the role which the media played during the aftermath.
much of the media handled families in a very respectful way. But we've heard examples where that wasn't the case, and we think they need to be explored and understood.
The long struggle of those whose loved ones died at Hillsborough has recently inspired a charter for families bereaved through public tragedy.
There are elements of the response that could have been better.
The Arena Review asks organisations to sign up to it and put the needs of such families before their own reputations.
I want anybody who works in our emergency services to know that they will be supported in coming forward to tell it exactly as it was, because that's what we need. We need the families to have the truth as quickly as possible.
In March, the full review into the attack will be published. 8 months after these 22 people died, their families' lives are still dominated by the tragedy. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Manchester.
Now, Tunisia's leaders say they will help the country's poorest families cope with the rising cost of living following days of protests against the government's austerity programme. The BBC reports.
For days now, in cities across the country, the protests have continued. This was the capital, Tunis. Some demonstrators waving yellow cards. They're angry about an economy that is in dire straits and a government they feel isn't doing anything to help.
This protest is against the budget, which is leading to poverty and hunger for the people. Our protest is completely peaceful. We're not calling for the overthrow of the government, we're calling for the overthrow of this budget.
Despite those claims, there were some scuffles with police. The Prime Minister has condemned the demonstrators, accusing them of trying to weaken the state. Just Tunis, this protest took place in the coastal city of Sfax. Discontent appears to be spreading. So how did this all come about? Well, at the beginning of January, a new austerity budget came into effect, raising taxes and leading to higher prices. Within days, people had taken to the streets, hundreds were arrested. But now the President and Prime Minister say they will try to help low-income families, with new measures coming into effect in the next few days. Fresh protests have been called for Sunday, the 7th anniversary of the fall of the country's former dictator. Tunisia has long claimed to be the one true success story of the Arab Spring, but not everyone is convinced. Tim Allman, BBC News.
Here in Britain, a surgeon who branded his initials onto the livers of 2 transplant patients has been fined and given community service by a court. Simon Bramall pleaded guilty to 2 counts of assault in December. His crimes, carried out at a hospital in Birmingham, were discovered when the patients returned to hospital for further surgery, as Seema Kotecha explains.
Mr. Bramall, what's your reaction?
Simon Bramall, once a respected surgeon, now a convicted criminal.
What would you like to say to the patients, Mr. Bramall?
Today he was fined £10,000 after pleading guilty to assaulting 2 patients on their livers. His victims were undergoing liver transplants at the time. In court, Judge Paul Farrer QC told him this was conduct born of professional arrogance of such magnitude that it strayed into criminal behaviour. What you did was an abuse of power and a betrayal of trust that these patients had invested in you.
Well, it was here at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham where Bramall committed his offences. He marked the livers in 2013, and it was a year later, after a disciplinary hearing, that he resigned his post.
Another of his patients, who also underwent a liver transplant by him, says he shouldn't be punished.
Signing his work is just his way of showing the artwork he's done. And the fact that he's saved so many lives through all the operations he's carried out, mine included, because without him I wouldn't be here, just makes me think he needs to carry on doing what he's good at.
Bramall branded SB on the organs with an argon beam machine, a heat-projecting device usually used to stop any bleeding. The Crown Prosecution Service compared its imprint to a minor burn.
What happened was a crime, and the criminal law applies equally to everybody, including doctors, and so it's important to
to hold people to account when they commit a crime of assault, and that's what's happened here.
The markings were discovered after other surgeons noticed them during operations. Bramall betrayed the trust of his patients and took advantage of them when they were at their most vulnerable. The General Medical Council, which has already issued him with a formal warning, will now decide whether to take any further action against the surgeon. Seema Kotecha, BBC News, Birmingham.
Now, it's the Queen as you've never seen or heard her before. To mark the 65th anniversary of her coronation in 1953, Her Majesty has been giving a unique insight into the day and what it meant to her at the time. She's been speaking to the royal commentator Alistair Bruce for a BBC programme, and a key piece of advice for any would-be monarch: don't look down, as our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell explains.
She famously doesn't do interviews. This is probably she'll get a conversation with questions about the coronation, the crown jewels and the imperial state crown worn by her and her father, King George VI.
Fortunately, my father and I have about the same sort of shaped head, but once you put it on, it stays. I mean, it just remains.
You have to keep your head very still.
Yes.
I mean, it was huge then.
Yes, very unwieldy. And you can't look down to read the speech, you have to take the speech up. Because if you did, your neck would break, or it'd fall off.
It's difficult to always remember that diamonds are stones, so they're very heavy.
Yes. So there are some disadvantages to crowns, but otherwise they're quite important things.
She rode to her coronation in the Gold State coach. It weighs 4 tons. It's not built for comfort.
Horrible. It's not meant for travelling in at all. I mean, it's just not, it's only sprung on leather.
So it rocks around a lot.
It's not very comfortable.
Were you in it for a long time? Probably
Halfway around London.
Really?
We must have gone about 4 or 5 miles. You can only go at a walking pace.
Yeah.
The horses couldn't possibly go any faster.
Right.
It's so heavy.
65 years after the event, a monarch talking about her coronation. The crown. The real one. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Now, Laurel and Hardy were one of Hollywood's most loved slapstick double acts. Now, a new discovery is being celebrated by their legions of fans. Fragments from the British actor Stan Laurel's solo film, Detained, which were believed to have been lost but have now been found. It's believed to be the only existing copy in the world. Anna Holligan reports.
Do you recognise this man? Look a little closer, because that's exactly what this archivist did. Jurjen Enzing had been stocktaking old nitrate films when he realised he'd stumbled upon one of the silent movie world's most captivating characters. The rediscovered scene shows Stan Laurel playing a prisoner, eventually exacting a typically absurd escape. This early experiment with special effects ended up on the cutting room floor.
These scenes and these fragments that we found were thought to be missing. Ted Okuda and James Neubauer, they wrote a book about the solo years of Stan Laurel, of which this movie is part, and they described this film as being only survived in a abridged version of 14 minutes, and now we found the second reel of the full version, so that's very exciting news.
Their diligence has meant this little lost movie has been restored.
When we discovered this, we first had to make sure that it's digital, and when we contacted Neubauer, he said that it was a very exciting moment for comedy movie history, and he was very glad that we found the scene so that the film can be a little bit more whole again.
Now a digital copy of the entire 1924 film Detained has been released, including these missing scenes. Anna Holligan, BBC News.
And don't forget, you can get more on all the stories that we've been talking about on the BBC News website. That's bbc.co.uk or bbc.com. And you can get in touch with us on social media too. But that's all for now. I'll be back with the headlines with you in a few moments. But thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.